Good evening, everybody, and welcome to my studio. My name's Richard Cleveland. On this particular episode, we are starting a brand new painting series, and we are going to be painting the Man of Steel. So if you're following along, you've downloaded this model from u3dprintshop.com. I would recommend that you do if you want to follow along with this. Print it out. Now, I've printed mine at half scale, so it is fairly big. It's not quite 1-to-1 scale, but it is fairly big. And I want to talk a little bit about the paints that we're going to use with this model. Now, I certainly could have gone ahead and basically just went and airbrushed this whole thing, but what this particular set of instructions is going to show you is how to paint with a brush. And it's really important that you get down the basics first. We're going to talk a little bit about mixing colors tonight. I'm going to show you how I go about mixing colors, or what I use to mix colors to make my basic flesh tone. And we're going to paint on the basic flesh tone to this model this evening. Now, this is the model that we're using, and this is the Superman bust, again from U3D Print Shop. It's an amazing sculpted model. What I want to do with this is something a little bit different than what I've done in the past. Everybody that has done this model has made it look like a rough and tough kind of Superman. What I want to do is I want to take it one step further. There was a comic book series called Infinite Crisis, and what I want to do is make his temples a little bit more gray. So we're going to give him more of an aged, elderly look on, or mature look on Superman. And we're going to start by painting the skin, and all of my skin starts out the same way. I don't go ahead and mix up special skin tones. Here's my palette. My palette is very well used. I usually don't clean it until I'm ready till it gets super gummed up. And then when it does, all I basically got to do is run it under water and just peel it all off. Here's the basic flesh color we're going to use. Now, this is a custom mix. We're going to use a variety of different paints, and I will talk to you about those really quickly. This is made up of Liquitex Basics paints, and I know that camera keeps shaking, and I apologize for that. And the colors that we are using are burnt sienna, raw sienna, and white. And these are the three paints that we're going to use to make up our basic skin tone. Now, these three paints are what you want for any type of basic skin tone. If you want something that's a little more Caucasian, you're going to use a little bit more white in this mix. If you want something that's a little bit more Asian, you're going to want to use more raw sienna. If you want something that's a little bit more tanned or Middle Eastern as a base coat, you're going to want to use a little bit more raw sienna. And typically what I'll do is I will mix these in a 1-to-1 ratio. Now, I found recently, after doing some experimenting, that by adding just a touch more white, I can lighten up that skin almost to look like a pair of nylons that your wife or maybe yourself wear. I don't know. I don't know what you're into. But this is a basic skin tone. This is kind of the same color that you can find on most action figures. And we're going to use this, and I put this in a custom dropper. You can find these on Thingiverse, or pardon me, not Thingiverse, but Amazon. You can find these on, and a variety of other places. I can't remember where my wife got these, but there was like a whole bag of them. And it's great when you go and you mix up a large batch like I've done here, and then I can just take that and I can put it into this bottle and thin it down just a little bit so it makes it easy to work with. The other thing that I do is I put little ball bearings into my paints. I also use the Vallejo colors as well, both in the Model Air Model Air right there, and this regular colors. Some of the other paints that I will use from time to time are Model Masters acrylics. I will use Tamiya acrylics. I really like using the FW inks when I am doing something that is a little bit more, needs a little bit more variety in the skin tones. I will use these, and we're going to use these throughout this series because because they are inks and they've got really good pigment, we're going to water them down a little bit when we get to that stage. And then we're going to show you how to do flicking or flecking, however you want to call it. But we are going to start with our basic flesh, and I think we need to get started. Now, Superman, you could go by all kinds of different Supermen, and I'm going to just quickly change cameras here. There we are, me down in the corner, maybe. There we go. All right, as soon as I get one of my useful little tools set up here, I'll be able to just do that. But for now, what we've got is we've got Superman down here on the table, as you can see. We can lean them back and we can get a good look. Now I've gone ahead and primed them, and the primers that I use are, I start with filler primer first. I think you can see that, and this is the Rust-Oleum filler primer. I'll just move Superman out of the way here a little bit. I use the Rust-Oleum filler primer, and that is a great filler primer for building up the layer lines, so you can really cut down on your other sort of cleanup work. And then finally, when I'm ready, I use the Rust-Oleum Painter's Touch 2X Ultra Cover Gray Primer. It's a great coating. It bonds to plastic really, really well. And of course, and this model is plastic because it's made from PLA. I printed this in PLA. It does double coverage, so it does a really good job of getting everywhere. So this is a great final primer. And then I use acrylic paints, just like I've showed you. I use the Liquitex acrylic paints. We are going to go into quite a detailed painting and how we do the painting, or what colors that we use and how we use them a little bit later on. But for now, I want to get started on really painting up our Superman here. And what we're going to do is, I've got my palette here. See if I can pull my palette into an area where you'll be able to see it. There we go, there's my palette. And I've got my flesh tone, my base flesh tone. So I'm just going to give that a quick little shake just to mix things up in there. And I'm not going to water this down. It's already quite thin, so I don't want to water it down anymore. So this is going to go on pretty thin, and I'm putting quite a bit into my palette. Like, you might think that's too much, but for what I'm going to do right now, it really isn't. And now I want to grab a fairly wide brush. I'm not using really expensive brushes here. I do have some that are a little bit more money than others, but this is a leaf plaid Chinese 1.5 inch brush. So I'm just going to dip it in there, and we're just going to start painting. Now, the thinner your paint, the more coverage you have to do. You can see that is quite thin, and don't worry about getting onto the hair or onto, other areas, because that's going to happen. Now that to me is a little thin, like really thin. And it's really hard to keep the brush strokes out when it's that thin. So what I'm going to do is, I'm probably going to thicken that up just a little bit, or I may just put extra coats on. That's probably what I'm going to end up doing, is just putting extra coats on. So all we're going to do is we're just going to brush this on. Doesn't matter if it gets into the hair, because we're going to deal with that at a little later date. And we'll just get nice long strokes in there to even out that paint. Now, because we're going to have to put on several coats, that it's going to then give us some better coverage. And I'm not going to show you putting on every coat, because if I do that, then it's just going to take up a lot of unnecessary time that, we don't really need to get into. So, and yeah, you're going to see brush strokes, but that's because, again, like I said, that's a little bit thin. Now I could probably thicken that up if I go back to the original pot of paint that I had. Let me see if I can do that. I'm just going to set my brush down here. Let's see what's in this pot. Wow, this pot's really stuck together. there's a little thicker paint in there, so I may dump some of that in there. That's going to help. Yeah, that's definitely thicker. So that's going to help. I have a lot of coverage to do here, so because I'm doing this at half scale, I just want to get myself a mixing stick. And I've got a lot of these little popsicle stick things around. Here's one right here. Just these things will do fine. And I'll just get in there and I will mix that up so it's a little thicker than what I was using before. Now, when it's thicker like this, it goes on a lot nicer. And you'll see that in just a moment, but let's get back to that. Okay, so we're just going to grab our brush, dip it in. Try not to take your paint all the way up into the ferrule if you can avoid it, because that can definitely cause a problem. Yeah, that's actually better already. I can see it. You guys might not be able to see it. Now you're going to see that gray through because it is quite a dark gray, so you're going to see it through there. And we're just going to continue to paint him up, get into all the areas. We'll come back and we'll even that out. And this will even out, your brush strokes will even out as well as you go ahead and put on more coats. That's all going to go away and those brush strokes will disappear. You can already see that it's starting to get a lot smoother as I go back and brush over it. All we're concerned about right now is just getting coverage on this model. And we'll come down there again. We'll just kind of clean that up a little bit. I got to get used to keeping this under the camera so you guys get to see what I'm doing. And you see I'm just getting into that ear area. Now if you come across areas that you can't get into with the brush that you're using, don't be afraid to switch out your brush for a different brush. And I do that all the time. I've got a variety of different brushes here that I use. I've got some sitting over here that are perfect for this application. I just have to find it. Of course, you know, I never have anything where I want it when I need it. And that's my fault. Okay, so I've got a brush like this. This is, again, this is a 3/16, so it's a round brush. So now this will allow me to get right in there and get in all those gray spots and cover that up. Now we're going to go in later on. Now, if you experience what I just experienced, and that's a hair coming out of your brush, you can grab yourself a pair of tweezers, and I had a pair here. There they are. Just go in and get the hair and try and lift it out without damaging your paint, or your underpaint, pardon me, your primer. There, oh, we had it. We just have to roll that out of there so we can grab it. There we go. There we go. We got that out of there. So now we'll just get all around the back of the ear as well. Put that aside. Go back to the brush that we were using because I like this brush a lot better. And I can get right in that back side. I know this looks messy right now, and it's going to look messy until we get a nice coat of paint on there. Now I'm not being too specific about where I'm hitting with this color, because any other areas we're going to cover up later anyway with other paints. All I'm trying to do right at this stage of the game is just get some of that skin color on them so I have a nice base to work with and a nice even base to work with. There we go. You don't have to mash your brush into your paint job either. Let your brush glide. There's a lot of undercuts in here, like right there and right under here, that I'm going to have to get into. Now I could have easily gone ahead and airbrushed this using the airbrush booth beside me, but I didn't want to do that because this is all about getting you guys looking at how paint actually works and how it goes on. And I am using acrylic paint, which is no different than any paints that you're going to find in your local craft store or at Michael's or anywhere else. Some of them you can find at your local hobby shops. I know here I go to a shop locally to get my Vallejo paints, and I get all of my Liquitex basic stuffs usually at Michael's. So nobody sponsors me for this. I just kind of go ahead and do it. Now we're just kind of slathering this paint on here. You don't want to go too thick, because if you go too thick, then you run into issues when it starts to dry. So we're just going to continue on here and just keep going, getting our paint on there. We may be able to get 2 nice coats of paint on. Brushes really make a huge difference in the quality of your paint job as well. Again, I'm painting over that eyeball. I don't really need to, but I am just for the sake of getting paint on here. Let's grab a little bit more. Get down in that ear. There we go. Get up in all those little crevices and around the back of the ear. And don't be afraid to, get paint on things right now, because remember, we're just starting out. We don't have to be really super neat at this stage. All we really want to do is we want to get paint onto the model. And we're going to check that other ear. We missed some spots on the other ear as well. So we're just going to use our brush. And we're just going to get that paint into all those crevices around the ear. And then we'll come back and make sure that it looks good. And we'll smooth it all out. If you can't afford really good brushes, you can always go ahead and buy yourself some cheap brushes. And I'm going to show you how to keep your brushes working for you. Now, some of this area is unnecessary that I'm getting into, because you're never going to see it anyway. Nobody really looks behind your model, but I know it's there, so I want to make sure that it looks good. Get around the back of his neck here. Now, some people will go out and they will get their own type of paint that's already the flesh color. I mean, you could certainly just paint this a flesh color and be done with it. But I like to add some realism to all of my models. And if you've seen anything that I've painted on Facebook or anything I've talked about on the first layer, you'll know that I strive for realism. It doesn't matter what or who the character is. And I've got another little nasty hair right there. That looks like it has come out. Might just have to dab that off with my finger. Come on. I think I got it. No, I didn't get it. Looks like it might be embedded into the paint. And while we're at this early stage, we can go ahead and do any of those little fix-ups. There's quite a bit of gray still showing through there, so I'm just going to keep going on this, and we'll talk while we do it. You can see now that I'm getting another coat on, it's really starting to smooth out. It's really starting to fill in and smooth out our paint a little bit, because this side is pretty much dry. Now, like I said, this is a beautiful sculpt, and the sculpts really can really make or break your the look of your model. I really like this sculpt. I mean, it's probably one of my favorite sculpts to date. Done by an independent artist, and this model is free, by the way, and there is a link in the description for you to be able to go and find it. Then we're going to let this paint dry, and we'll come back and I'll do any touch-ups probably off camera. There we go. That's starting to look better. I'm getting better coverage now. My paint's starting to thicken up a little bit too. And you guys can see where I'm going with this. Now, I don't mind putting on more coats. I actually prefer to put on a nice solid base coat. You know, you may talk to some artists and they may say, well, you know, I don't like to put on too much paint. I like to build it up. And I do too, actually. I like to build up my paint as well. But there comes a point, like we've got there, that's still a little thin, and we've got a little thin areas here and there, but we'll deal with them. Once you have a good solid base to start building your color on, and we're going to be showing you techniques like flicking. We're going to show you how to get realistic skin. I know right now it doesn't look like we're going to get there too soon, but you got to remember, we're going to be working on this about an hour a day. I could have gone ahead and used the hairdryer and got that first layer of paint that I put down to dry, and I probably should have. And then that would have made this much easier going on. Normally I tend to get the face painted nice solid one color, and that I call my undercoat, and then I build everything upon that. And once you do that, you'll notice how your skin texture starts to become more alive. And this doesn't happen overnight. This is going to take a lot of practice, and I still practice all the time. I like to grab a model and just start practicing, and I look in the mirror, look at photographs of people, look at people's faces, look at people's skin textures. You're going to notice one thing about people's skin textures that you don't see in figures, and you don't see in a lot of paint jobs, and that's how much color is actually in the skin. There is a lot of color in the skin, and a lot of people don't realize that. As you can see, we're getting better coverage now. The reason I don't use the hairdryer too much is because it makes a lot of noise, and nobody wants to listen to a hairdryer going. So we're going to go ahead and keep doing this. I'm going to work off camera to get this fully done for the next episode, where we will start doing our first dry brush, and we'll make sure that we've got a nice surface to work on, and we would go from there. Now, I know this looks spotty and it looks pretty bad right at this stage, and it will until we've built up that color. But by the time you've got your color on and you've got it looking the way that you want it to look for your base color, you'll be amazed at how fast you can start building up the color on a character like this. So we'll get back behind the ear here again. Again, this area is going to be kind of dark and in shadow anyway, and we're going to play with shadows. We're going to show you how to add natural shadowing in to the best of my ability. Now, I'm used to painting 28 millimeter tall miniatures, which very different from doing this type of painting. When you're doing smaller miniatures, you don't have to do nearly as much detail because you're never going to see it on a tabletop when you're tabletop gaming. So, but with this, you are going to see that detail, and you're going to see it from a fair distance away because of the size of this model. So we're just trying to get, like I said, a fairly smooth base down that we'll be able to use later on in the rest of our tutorial. Okay, so let's put him aside for a little bit. We're just going to stick him in the paint booth here for a moment. Just toss him right there, and we'll go ahead and switch back to our camera. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about paint. Paint, I use a variety of paints, as I showed you at the beginning of this video. But where I started was with Liquitex Basics, and I recommend that everybody at least go to your local hobby shop and get yourself a good set of these Liquitex Basics. And I'll tell you exactly which ones I'm using. And maybe we'll go back to the overhead here, and I'll put them down on the table. There we go. So we have titanium white. You want to make sure that you have a red, and in this case I'm using primary red. So we'll try and keep these all in camera. Then primary blue, and finally primary yellow. Now you'll also need a black, and I use Mars Black. So if you're going to have any paints in your collection, these are the 5 that I would recommend. And the reason that I recommend these 5 first and foremost is because with these 5 you can make any shade of color you want. You can thin them, you can put them in jars like this one. If you can't afford any more, these are about $5 or $6 for a tube this big, and this is a 4 US fluid ounce tube, which is a lot of paint. Next, I would get, as a secondary set to complement your first set, I would get myself a neutral gray value 5, which is kind of right in the middle of gray, and you can darken or lighten that with black or white. Put that one down. Then of course a raw sienna and a burnt sienna. Now again, you're going to use these in combination with your whites to make your Caucasian, Asian, and Indian Asian skin tones. Then, to complement those, I also use burnt umber and raw umber. And I will use actually all 5 of these if I'm doing an African American skin tone, or a skin tone that has to be a little darker. And then it's always handy to have a red oxide. And I'll show you why we use this red oxide a little bit later on in our tutorials. But those are the paints so that I would recommend that everybody at least start with if you can't afford to go out and buy yourself a set of the Vallejos. Now the Vallejos are a beautiful paint, don't get me wrong, but they depending on where you buy them, they run anywhere from $5 to $7 a paint, whereas a whole tube of this is about $5 or $6. So you know, it's all a matter of what you want to do and what you want to paint with. And I'll put little ball bearings in all of these. Stainless steel ball bearings. I have some over here on my desk. You can buy these on Amazon. Just a little bit of ball bearings, and I'll put them inside these particular paints because sometimes these are really thick and sometimes they're really thin, and it helps to agitate the paint. So I really recommend that if you are going to get the Vallejos, get yourself some of these. They're heavy enough to stay in there. Don't get the plastic ones because the plastic ones will be too light to agitate your paint. Always buy stainless steel, non-rusting BBs or ball bearings, and they will certainly help you. Now, I said I would talk a little bit about cleaning up our brushes, but before I do that, I want to talk a little bit about some of the other colors or things that I have in my arsenal that help me with the painting that I do. I'll put that up there, and we'll put that up there. Let's talk about the FW inks. Now, these I never used until just recently. Now, these are an acrylic ink, so they're like an acrylic paint, but they have a lot of pigment in them. So when I'm doing flicking to get the color in the skin tones, because your skin, like I said, is made up of many, many different small pigments of color or blotches of color. Unless you're wearing like heavy cover up like a woman would wear, and you won't see that. But on a natural skin tone, you're going to see a lot of different color. Everything from whites to a little bit of greens. You'll get a little bit of, which one is this? This is a raw sienna. You'll even see purples in there. You'll see, some darker greens, some reds, of course, some yellow, some blue. And we're going to show you how to use all those later on. These are not that cheap. You can buy them individually. I think they're about $7 to $10 a piece, depending on where you get them. I know Michael's has a really good selection of them. A local art store that I use here in Calgary has a really good selection of them as well, and they're not that badly expensive. They're not ungodly expensive. When using these paints, I also use a retarder and acrylic flow ease or release. Both of these are great additives. The first one here, which is the acrylic flow release, you add it to your paint to improve the flow for brushing or deeper staining effects. So this will help you thin it out. This is, when you put this in, if you put too much of it in, it acts like soap, so it can really thin and run everywhere. So you don't want to put too much of this in. And then of course there's a retarder. What this does is this increases the working time of your acrylic paint. So if you've got a lot of paint to use, you got a large area to cover, and you want to just squirt some retarder into your paint, and this is definitely what you want to use. I also will use some isopropyl alcohol. You can see I've got some in a 4-ounce bottle here. Excuse me. With a spout cap. So this I got at the art store, and this is great because I will use isopropyl alcohol with water and a little bit of the additive to make up my own thinner. So I pre-mix my own thinner. I know it looks like water, and that's essentially what it is. It's 50% water with 50% isopropyl alcohol, and then I put in a little bit of the flow acrylic. For a bottle this size, which is a 30 ml bottle, I'll probably put about 6 drops of that in, and it seems to work really well for me. It might work really well for you. This is a way to make your own. It's far cheaper to make your own this way than it is to go out and buy an acrylic thinner like Flow Aid. Like this stuff here is $12.95. So I don't use it very often. I like to make up my own. And the recipe that I found that works for me is, like I said, 50% of this, 50% of water, not tap water. You want to use distilled water, stuff that you can find at your pharmacy or even at Walmart. I get mine in a 4-liter jug from Walmart. But with the isopropyl alcohol, it really is a great little additive. Now, this can also be used as airbrush thinner as well. So if I'm using these paints, or I'm using the Liquitex Basics and I want to thin them down to go through the airbrush, I will use this, just a few drops of this in with my paint to thin it out, and it works really good. Now, These paints here, the Model Air from Vallejo, are already pre-thinned. So you just basically drop these into your airbrush and away you go. These acrylics here from Model Master, you do need to use a thinner on them if you're going to use them for any real projects. You can make your own airbrush thinner. You can buy airbrush thinner. I have bought the Tamiya airbrush thinner in the past, and you can see that it's $7.99 for, how many fluid out? 250 milliliters. That's about a can of Coke, I think, or a cup. That's about a cup of stuff. Now you can make your own airbrush cleaner. And what I use for airbrush cleaner is basically Windex. Windex, well, not really, it's not really Windex. It's more washer fluid for your car. And then I'll add a little bit of water to it just to thin it out a little bit, because it doesn't have to be that harsh. And that'll help clean your airbrush. What else do I want to talk to you guys about? This stuff right here, low odor clear matte spray. Between my coats of paint, I like to use this stuff. It's about $8 a can at Walmart, here in Canada anyway. It's got low odor, it's convenient to spray indoors, it's durable, and it has a soap and water cleanup. So I use this to seal in my protect the layers of each and every layer that I do. When I'm happy with it, I'll go ahead and spray it, and I'll leave it for a little while. Always a good idea to have a selection of these cups on hand. Let me see if I can get one out. There we go. These little cups here, they're like little mini solo cups. I like having them on hand because I can mix up paints in them. I also have a little Badger Airbrush Company paint mixer. It uses just a couple of AA batteries, and you can find these at your local hobby shop or online. It's a great little tool to have. I've had that around for a long, long time. Now that brush is starting to get a little hard, so I'm going to have to get into some water pretty soon. But I would use this to mix up paint. You know, if I was going to do a fair amount, if I'm getting ready to make up, let's say, a new bottle of this, I would mix it in here first and go ahead and then dump it into here. Or if I'm mixing it up without any thinner in it, I will mix it up and put it into the bigger jar so I have some for later. So a good selection of these is always good. These are cheap. You can find them at Walmart or your dollar store or whatever. I also like having makeup sponges, like these little wedges on hand. A lot of times and I'm going to show you how to use this later on, just like makeup, this is a great tool for when you're doing your washes and you want to blend your wash in. These are great for that. I really like these for that purpose, and I usually have a bag of them kicking around. Q-tips or cotton swabs, whatever you want to call them. I like to have those kicking around as well quite a bit. Cafe sticks, wooden sticks like you saw me use over here when I mixed up that paint to get it a little thicker. You'll notice you can get like 150 of these for like $1 or $2 at the dollar store. They're great for mixing paint. I really like those kicking around. What else do I want? Oh yes, let's get on to cleaning our brushes, and I want to show you some of the things that I use when I'm cleaning my brushes. First and foremost, brush cleaner and preserver. You can find this online. It's a great product. I really, really like it. It's good for oil paints. It's good for watercolors, acrylic stains, all kinds of stuff. Basically what you do is you get your brush wet, and then you mix it in here like soap. It reminds me of shaving soap. Some of the younger viewers may not understand what shaving soap is, but some of the guys that are my age watching this will know what shaving soap is. Once I've cleaned my brush, I always like to make sure that I've got a little extra. I like to make sure that my brush is fully clean, so I will use the Winsor & Newton brush cleaner and restorer. It's for dried acrylic and oil colors. Once I've towel dried my brush, I'll dip it in here and I'll give it one more really good clean, dip it in water, and then I can put it away in my brush cup for another time. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell. The stuff that I use, this stuff's not cheap, it's $9.75, but it will go a long way. And your brushes, you don't need really expensive brushes. Here you can see that this is an IMEX. I use this quite often. This one I believe I bought in a pack at Walmart. They're called Simply Simons. They're a decent little brush. I don't mind them at all. And then of course I do have some high quality brushes that I've purchased. And I really like the Mini Majestics. I like them because they're like a pen and you can hold them like a pen. So you can really get in there and get detail. And I'll buy a selection of these from 0 to 5 zeros when I'm doing smaller stuff. Now this is a brush that's a little stiff. I obviously didn't clean that. This is a number 8. Again, this is Simply Simons. You can find these in a pack at Walmart for about $6 or $7. Here's another brush that's fairly expensive. This is a Royal and Langnickel. This is the number 1 brush. I like it because it's long. When you're cleaning your brushes that have nice tips on them, you want to make sure that you preserve those tips. So when I'm done, I will take my brush and I will roll it so it has somewhat of a nice tip on it when I'm ready to use it. Here's a good example of that. You see that I have a pretty decent tip on that still, and this is a 0. That's that 0 I showed you earlier. Here's another one that has a really good tip on it. This is one of those Mini Majestics. You can see there's a really nice tip on there. And that one looks like it might be a little dried up, so I'm going to have to clean that one out before I use it next. So that's a kind of a look at the tools that I use to do my painting. And of course I do use an airbrush, and we're going to talk about airbrushing at another time when we get into doing a project where we're using the airbrush more and more. So that is our look. I'm going to get going on Superman here a little bit more. I'm just going to see how dry he is. He's still got a little tackiness to him. So I'm going to go ahead and even out that paint on the main base coat. Make sure it's nice and even, so when we meet next time, we're going to get into dry brushing, and we're going to start to bring out some of those details in that skin texture, and then we'll get on to doing, we may actually even base coat the hair at that point as well. So thank you, my friends, for joining me. Thank you to all my Patreons. You guys, without you guys, this would be impossible. So I do thank you guys very much, and we will see you on the next one in episode 2, where we start getting into dry brushing, and I'll show you what I use for a dry brush. Have a good one.